Welcome to Bible Story Time, and thank you for joining us. Today we journey from a heavenly promise whispered in a quiet room to its earthly fulfillment on a cold and noisy night. This is a story where the decree of a mighty emperor and the cry of a newborn baby collide, revealing that God's greatest plans unfold not in the halls of power, but in the humblest of places. This is the story of the birth of Jesus. Our story begins not with a holy vision, but with a political command. In a palace of marble and gold, Caesar Augustus, the most powerful man in the world, issued a decree that a census should be taken. He wanted to count his subjects, to measure the scope of his dominion. The entire Roman world was set in motion by the whim of one man, a vast bureaucratic machine turning its gears. This global command had very personal consequences for a young couple in the forgotten town of Nazareth. Because Joseph was of the house and line of King David, the law required them to make the grueling journey south to David's ancestral town, Bethlehem. Imagine the dust, the steep hills, the uncertainty of the road. It was a journey of about 90 miles, difficult for anyone, but almost unimaginable for a young woman like Mary in her final, heavy days of pregnancy. They were not traveling for a joyful homecoming or a family celebration. They were two ordinary people, caught in the currents of empire, traveling to be counted, to be taxed, to be noted down in an emperor's ledger. In the eyes of Rome, they were just two more numbers. When they finally arrived in Bethlehem, exhausted and desperate for rest, they found a city in chaos. The census had swelled the small town to its breaking point. Every home, every guest room, every available space was already taken. You can almost feel their frantic search, the closed doors, the apologetic shrugs. And the Bible tells us the outcome with simple, heartbreaking clarity. There was no room for them in the inn. The moment that all of creation had been waiting for, the moment promised by prophets for centuries and announced to Mary by an angel, arrived not with ceremony, not in a prepared place of honor, but in the midst of someone else's chaos. It arrived in a place of last resort, a place meant for animals. And there, in that lowly place, surrounded by the sounds and smells of a stable, Mary gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She did for him what any loving mother would do. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth to keep him warm and secure. But there was no cradle, no bassinet fit for a child, let alone the King of Kings. So she laid him in a manger, a rough-hewn feeding trough for animals. Let that image sink in. The Word who spoke the stars into existence now lay silent in a box of straw. The Son of the Most High, whose kingdom would have no end, was an unseen infant in a borrowed stable. The hands that sculpted the mountains were now tiny fists, unable to grasp. The bread of life was laid where the animals came to eat. The one for whom there was no room in the world's inns was the very one who had created the world. This is the central paradox of our faith. The story of Christmas is not a story of sanitized glory, but of gritty, humble, inconvenient love. God did not wait for the world to be ready for him. He did not demand a perfect welcome or a pristine environment. He entered right into our mess, into our busyness, into our no-room reality. We all have our own reasons for feeling like there's no room. Our lives are too busy, our calendars too full. Our homes are too chaotic, our hearts too cluttered with worry, ambition, and distraction. We think God can only show up when we get things perfect, when we finally clean up our act, when we make a special, sanctified space for Him. We wait for the grand cathedral moment, but our lives often feel more like a crowded, messy stable. The birth of Jesus shatters that idea. It tells us that God's glory is not afraid of the stable. He is not put off by the mess or the smell or the inconvenience. In fact, He chooses it. The census of a mighty Caesar was just the stage setting. The real work of God, the true turning point of history, was happening in the place no one was looking. So when you feel that your life is too messy, too chaotic, or too insignificant for a holy moment, remember Bethlehem. Look not for a perfect room, but for the humble manger in your own life. Because the God of the universe did not just come to a world that had no room for Him. He came specifically to the places where we feel there is no room. He is the God who shows up in the stable, not in spite of the mess, but in the very heart of it. Thank you for watching Bible Story Time. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. These ancient stories still breathe life, because the God who made a manger a throne still enters the mess of our lives today.